So this is the masthead of William Lloyd Garrison's original abolitionist newspaper, but it's colorized because it's the Liberator dot today. Apparently, since 1539 on to this present day, how's that for longevity, the following saying has appeared in collections of proverbs. Where there's life, there's hope. Meaning so long as you are hanging in there, so long as you are still breathing, there's the hope of recovery. Since the beginning of our study of hope, I wonder if this saying were to appear in the biblical book of Proverbs, if it would not rather be rendered the other way around. Where there's hope, there's life. One of the purposes of hope is that it turns its back on death. It chooses life. My name is Lowell Bliss. Welcome to episode 11 of the Liberator Today's video series on hope. If you are visiting the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., after passing through the sobering exhibits, you end up in the Hall of Remembrance. Inscribed on the walls is Deuteronomy 30:19. I call heaven and earth to witness this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life, that you and your offspring shall live. This verse from the Torah has been called the basis of Jewish ethics. But the choice between life and death is more than just an ethical challenge. How were the prisoners of the Holocaust supposed to choose life when the choice of death seems to have been made for them? How do you choose life when you are powerless, when you have no say in the matter? What is the means for choosing life when death has been pressed in all around you? I argue that hope is that means. Hope is the muscle in our souls that allows us to turn our backs on death and turn our faces toward life. The illustration from the concentration camps is graphic, but not irrelevant for you and me. In 1962, the Department of the Episcopal Church asked lay theologian William Stringfellow to write a book for his high school students. He turned in a manuscript entitled Instead of Death. The publisher raised an eyebrow, and some in the church raised an outcry. What are you doing, man? You're writing to youth. They don't think of death. Stringfellow raised the question whether any of us indeed think of anything else. This is a book about death, he writes, first paragraph. It consists of essays about the concrete reality of death in a contemporary life, about the vitality of the presence and power of death over human existence, and indeed over the whole of creation. The suggestion here is that the power of death can be identified in American society, as well as elsewhere for that matter, as the pervasive, decisive, reigning, ultimate power. Therefore, for an individual's own small life, yours or mine or anybody's, death is the reality that has the most immediate, personal, everyday significance. Stringfellow was a street lawyer in East Harlem in the 1960s. He was an anti-war, Vietnam War activist. He was hounded by the FBI for harboring the priest Daniel Berrigan. Like another celibate homosexual, Henry Nouwen, Stringfellow's relationships were characterized by both deep friendships and piercing loneliness. He was weakened by diabetes and died of it in 1985. Stringfellow knew firsthand the pervasive nature of death, little of which he chose. He therefore addresses teenagers honestly about the death that they too will know in relationships, sex, work, the consumption ethic, our technocratic society, and in the institutions that surround us. When you come in touch with your own hopeless feelings, where do you encounter, in Stringfellow's words, the vitality of the presence and power of death? I don't want to play loose with the idea of physical suicide that grows out of despair, although hope is the muscle in our souls that does turn its back, its physical back, on physical suicide. But what are other ways that you have been tempted to kill off a portion of yourself, a part of your being? Or even more fully, how have you been tempted to kill the original vision of a fully alive self that God made and loves? In arguing with his publishers, Stringfellow writes, at the same time, death is not a morbid preoccupation in biblical faith. such as it may have now become in American society. The focus of the biblical witness is not upon death as such, but upon the historic transcendence of death, upon the resurrection from death. It was this relationship of the power of death to the Word of God, this saga of death and resurrection, this simultaneous attention to the awareness and scope of death and the accessible grace of God in overcoming the vitality of death in this world that was stated, perhaps even understated, in the title, Instead of Death, unquote. Next week, we'll unpack the ways in which one can turn one's back on death. 4 ways we'll explore. I've even suggested a practical spiritual exercise. I'm Lowell Bliss, environmental missionary and climate activist. Thank you for visiting the Liberator today.